Ken Kercheval as a person.
Ken Kercheval, when I first met Ken Kercheval, he was one of the guys that was going to be the next James Dean. You know, after James Dean died, everybody was going to be the next James Dean. He came from the stage. He was very intense, and I think we were lucky to have him because he was a really good artist. I never got to know him personally very well, but he did play that part, and that part was written. That's another. Again, I keep being so critical, and I'm going to.
The part of Cliff Barnes.
Yeah, well, no, about the show in general. I would have loved more subtext. I would have looked to see the guy say, I know, everybody talks about him being a mad dog out for the union. No, I'm past all that. Now it's just, I ruined my family. I ruined, so that there's a little bit. Of course, he isn't. He's still just as bad. He's exactly J.R. But I thought he was a little obvious, but that was in the writing, not in the performance. Ken Kercheval was a really good actor. And, I think that it was very funny. My daughter was moving to London. She's just finishing college, and I was over there. And this was in the middle of all the Dallas thing. We were looking for a flat for her. And the real estate guy, he was a young man, when he found out that I had created Dallas, just did everything he showed us imitating Cliff Barnes, imitating Ken Kercheval doing Cliff Barnes. So he made he's my man. He's my favorite man. There's an English guy, upper crust English guy doing a Texas accent.
Steve Canale.
Steve Canale is a really nice guy. And Steve Canale is that guy, is Ray. I felt a real bond with Steve because his wife and my wife were both pregnant when we were doing Dallas, and I think their second child was born at the same time too. But the Steve I remember always said he just wanted a ranch, and that's all. He wanted to work and get himself a ranch, and that's just what he did. Because you don't see him. I don't think he acts anywhere.
How do you feel Dallas was a reflection of the times, or at least the early 1980s?
I'm very fond of saying this without taking any credit for any prescience. It was luck. But is that Dallas was the perfect show for the first Reagan administration, as Dynasty was the perfect show for the second Reagan administration. Now, Dallas was written in 1977, so there was no Reagan. And it would be nice to say that I felt that all this 80s greed, this Ivan Boesky period was coming. I didn't. I just wrote it, And if you notice, though, the Dallas mansion, Dallas South Fork, is really modest, especially compared to the Dynasty world. And I think one of the reasons that it struck, the same reason All in the Family took at the time it did, because there was a little backlash. And so even though Archie Bunker was supposed to be not a likable guy, he was a likable guy, even though he was a racist and bigot. I think in Dallas, all this ambition, all this desire for power, all this greed, but it was a different kind of greed than mid-70s greed. It was just, I want the money, I want the power, and the fun of getting there is what it's all about. So Dallas became about the acquisition of money and power, Dynasty about all the things that money and power could buy. I also think that Dallas reflected at times because people were at that time, late 70s, early 80s, getting extremely rich. That's when you first heard about, we hadn't gotten the dot-com boom yet, but it was just before that, and banking. And I think people like to see people that rich, that miserable. And that was another thing I can't complain to be. I can't say that I'm responsible for it, or that I was prescient and felt it. Well, maybe I felt it. But that's one of the things about the show that I think has not been discussed, that really caught on.
And what was Lorimar Productions' role in all of this?
Well, when I was working on Family, when the first season was up, I had the opportunity to write a pilot for them, ABC did. ABC didn't shoot. At the same time that I wrote Dallas. I don't even remember what it was called, Partners. And they gave me a very nice, because I was really hot now, and they gave me a very nice offer to stay part of them. And of course I'd written Dallas, now it was being produced, and Lorimar gave me a really good deal. And the reason that I went with Lorimar is that Lorimar was such a great place to be, and that also when I looked at the two scripts, the Partner script was clearly a Spelling Goldberg script. Spelling Goldberg did Starsky and Hutch, and they did Love Boat, and they did Charlie's Angels. And that script, as I read it, even though I didn't purposely set out, it was clearly a Spelling Goldberg script. This script, Dallas, was a David Jacobs script. And Lorimar really permitted that to happen. And the reason that it did, I'm just doing a PhD thesis aloud here, is that its first success came from The Waltons. The Waltons was a TV movie. Merv Adelson and Lee Rich. Lee Rich was in advertising. I'm not sure what Merv did, but they came together. They did this movie called The Homecoming, written by Earl Hamner, and it was a big success. Phil Capice was the executive at CBS, developed it. So they made a TV series out of it, and they made it work too because it was against Flip Wilson, and it almost went under. And Merv and Lee took out an ad in the New York Times and other papers saying this show is so beautiful it has to die. It's a very famous moment that I'm sure Lee talked about in his equivalent, but it's a beautiful ad in which it gives credit to. It sounded like the Obama campaign a couple of weeks ago because Clinton campaign a few weeks ago. Everybody's talking nice, where it said Flip Wilson's a very funny guy and whatever the other station is, but you have to try to watch the show. You have to save the show. And it was beautiful, and it saved it. And the Waltons lasted 10 years, and it was really first rate for the first 5 or 6 years. And even when it was kind of tapering off, it was really terrific. Now, they had Bill Blinn, who was a very hot writer in the late 70s, did another, I did a pilot for them called 8 Is Enough. And I had done Dallas, and who else was there? I don't remember. But it wasn't, there was no Lorimar kind of show, except they tended to be big family shows. But that was just something that happened. And it was a great place to be because I've never, Spelling and Goldberg were very respectful of writers, but not so much as Lee. Lee Rich. Lee always, and I didn't work as much with Merv, so I won't claim to know what was going through his mind, except that this story has been told so often don't mind telling it again. When I did send in the Dallas script on December 10th, 1977, Merv was on his way to Italy on a plane, and when he landed, I don't know if it was actually that day, but he called back in to say, don't send the script in. And he called back that day, the same day they gave us the order for 5. So they were always feisty with each other anyway. So when he said that to Lee, don't send the script in, and Lee said, well, should I turn down the order for 5 we just got, So I don't know how much that story has been embellished in time, but they had different tastes. Lorimar was really a place that gave, it was equivalent in drama to what Mary Tyler Moore, MTM, was in comedy, in that it belonged to the writers. And you were royalty if you were the writer there. And it was just fun. Lee Rich was the greatest salesman I've ever seen, and the most fun guy. I mean, if you think of these studio moguls, and Lee had such a good and bad reputation. I don't know if you want this anecdote, but I'm going to tell it. I went to lunch with my agent, who was dinner with my agent, who was Bill Haber, and with another couple, a third couple. He was a producer, the guy, And he sat down. He came in a little late. We had been waiting. It was one of the Wolfgang Puck place in Malibu, not Malibu, in Santa Monica, which had just opened. So we waited for our table, and then we came, and then John joined us. So John's wife, sitting at the end of the table, says to John, "John, you're sitting where the worst person in the world just sat up to 10 minutes, until 10 minutes ago." Now, I didn't see who it was who had been at that table. And he said, "Who's that?" She said, "The worst person in the world." So he named somebody. She said, "Worse." And she said, named somebody else. And she said, "Worse." And he said, "Lee Rich?" And she said, "Worse." And he said, "Worse than Lee Rich?" Well, I told this story to Lee the next day, and he said, "Well, who was it?" Absolutely didn't care about, he liked it. He liked that story. But he wasn't. He was one of those, you learn something about behavior from people that show you a kind of behavior. When I was with Lee Rich, it was like I was sitting in the back of a convertible with my head down. He would drive up one sideways, up the sides of buildings, down. But boy, he'd get me someplace interesting. But the thing that I learned from him, in a semi-conscious way, was Lee would always show you his vulnerabilities as a person. You could hurt his feelings. This guy wanted to be the worst person in the world. You could very easily, "Why does he say things like that about me?" He'd say, "Why does he think why does he hate me? I don't hate him." And, and those kind of things. And it was so endearing. And he was so much fun. And I think when I started running shows after that, I kind of made it a point to always, because I had lots of writers working for me, and mostly television's run by writers and staffs of writers, that always show them my weakness. That never be afraid to hide. They're going to find out I can't do this. If I rewrite their scene and they don't like it, well, I rewrote it for a reason. Rewrite it better then. Okay, maybe I'm wrong in this case. I wasn't, but no, but really to show. I do that now. I teach, school, and I do that. Just show the weaknesses right up front. And Lee, for all of his power and all of that reputation, was a man that was not afraid to show you his humanity. I mean, he's just a terrific guy. I just adore him.
Excellent. Moving ahead.
And Laura Marr, wait, sorry, I'm not finished. But Laura Marr reflected in a way that also the feistiness of it. At Spelling Goldberg, everything was well, that's not true. Everything was we, but at Laura Marr, you could still be competitive within the place. But in pilot season, he would call me up. He did call me up at 1 o'clock in the morning and say, he was in the airport, and he said, "NBC is really unhappy with the rewrite of the script, and he's going to pull the plug because we were supposed to shoot the pilot. We were supposed to start shooting next week." And I'd say, "Well, what do you want me to do, Lee? I'm exclusive with CBS." He says, "They don't know that." So there I was at 2 o'clock in the morning, writing everything that was wrong, everything they were going to fix. I wrote a memo, fix this, fix it. So they took the memo the next day to NBC and said, "Okay, we're going to do this, 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 this." And Brandon Tartikoff said, "Oh, okay, well then go ahead." And then they didn't do any of it. But he would do that. He'd tie us all together and turn us into a company. Even if we didn't like him, I couldn't stand these guys whose pilot I had just saved. But he really made us into, without that crazy being company men or anything. He really, it was a cool place to be in. I was so sorry I actually had my ex-wife had been my agent, and when I came to a point early where I didn't need an agent anymore because I wasn't going anywhere. I was staying there. This is my house for life, and it really, I won't say it broke my heart, but I was definitely unhappy when they merged with Telepictures, and then the ending was.
We may talk about that again in just a minute.
Okay.
Speaking of pilots, talk a little bit about the 5-episode miniseries pilot for Dallas. What was your involvement in?
I wrote the pilot script. That's the thing that got
Right.
picked up. That's the one that ends is number 1. And then we wrote 5 additional scripts, 4, well, we wrote 5, but we shot 4 additional scripts that were sort of, they called it the miniseries, but the thing is they weren't really continuous. They really, each one could stand on its own, because we really felt that I always felt this, that you can't start a serial as a serial, because if you do, you're asking the audience to commit too early. You have to get them to love the characters and love the situation. So the goal was actually Nigel McKeon, who was my boss on Family, always said, since that was a show, it used to be a thing in television where never unchanging. You know, Barnaby Jones was the same every week, and you could switch the shows around. But once you had a show like Family or 8 is Enough, where you, if Willie gets married and his wife dies, you can't play the same Willie the week after. So even though you're not doing a serial, you're doing an arc. And Nigel always said, you solve the, what was it? It was a really good word. Resolve the situation, don't solve the problem. And that way, and that was sort of the thing with the first Dallas. Those episodes, each one would stand on its own, had its own denouement, had its own development, its own story. But the problem, the JR, Bobby, Pam conflict would remain from show to show to show. And then gradually, once we had our audience, we were able then to serialize more. Each show still should have its own dramatic wholeness. But those 5 shows, those original 5 shows, were just really to highlight each of the characters. The second one was a mess. But every second show that I've ever done has been a mess. It's called Lucy's Lessons. The third one was okay. It was about a senator that they get in trouble. And the fourth one, I don't remember. But the 5th one was really the pilot in mine. It was called Barbecue. And I should say not just because I wrote it. I mean, I rewrote all of those 5. But Barbecue, it was nice to work this way because the pilot sort of set it up, and then we kind of showed typical episodes. But it was Barbecue that really had everything come together and work. And they did a Barbecue episode every year.
And describe the Barbecue episode for me. Just
the original Barbecue episode, well, it was all took place at a barbecue. Almost all of it. Pam finds out she's pregnant right before it. And it ends with her having a miscarriage that may or may not have been purposely caused by JR. And all the stories that we were covering played through it. But there was the caterers, who were a black couple, were commenting the whole time on what was happening. They were betting on how long it would take Sue Ellen to get drunk, you know. And they were kind of served as the Greek chorus, and they just walked through the show, and it wasn't in real time, but it all took place in the barbecue from the beginning, you know, when she's telling Bobby she's pregnant right before the barbecue, and then they go to the barbecue and all of the conflicts, and then it's a terrible thing for Sue Ellen and JR because they don't have a baby yet, so it looks like little brother's going to have the first grandchild. So it really means a lot to them. I don't remember all of the subplots, but everybody had his own story in there, his or her own story in there.
Now, would you say it had any kind of a thematic connection to Romeo and Juliet? I believe I read this somewhere.
Dallas definitely
Dallas.
had. Dallas was Romeo and Juliet, of course, and Cain and Abel. There are only 11 stories, as every writer you've interviewed has told you, but we took 2 of them. No, when I went home with that, knowing they had Linda Evans, and we wanted a saga. You just have, you know, boy and girl get married, their parents hate each other. And that's all the Romeo and Juliet, they're in there. We have no balcony scene.
How involved were you in the actual production, and for how long?
I was involved in the first 5, but really I was the writer. I was the only writer. And through episode 16 in the first season. But by then I had another script that I wrote for Laura Marr called Married the First Year that I also did 5 of. about two kids that get married right out of high school. In fact, when I wrote that, I produced that right after Dallas was produced. That was my first producing, and I loved that. And I thought, oh, this is nice. I'll do one for them and one for me. But I soon learned that everything that would be for me would flop, because I did have a softer kind of approach. But it was a very sweet show, and
Were you on the set often
on
on Dallas?
Dallas. Oh yeah. So I really was. Yeah, I was on the set, but I wasn't. I liked Leonard Katzman, and he and I got along very well. And I wrote the 2-hour episode that started the first full season with the first appearance of Gary in Las Vegas, which was a pretty good episode. But I didn't. Leonard was doing things his way, and it was working, and it definitely wasn't the way I would have done it. And on the one hand, I still had a certain amount of modesty because of soon to be trampled on. A certain amount of modesty because I was new, and but I also wanted, I had the power because Dallas was becoming successful, and I had the influence that people never wanted to make me mad, so that was good. So I could really get my way. Leonard and I, it's not fair to say we weren't getting along, because it was Leonard and Phil that never got along, even though they had exactly the same mind. But I didn't want to be. I wanted to do my own shows, and I would meet with them every year, formally or not, on the Bible. We had offices in the Barrymore building at MGM, and they were exactly the same. Leonard's was on top floor, mine was right under it. So Leonard was right up there. He was making too much noise. I had a broom, And so we saw a lot of each other. But I have to be honest. I had very little emotional investment in Dallas. It was a guilty pleasure for me, because it was like, well, here come the checks, and they're nice. If it hadn't been my first thing, they would have been nicer. But not until we did the prequel, in the middle, did I really reattach to it. And as the show got older, when you get old, you have to kind of amputate limbs. Always came back to those original 7 characters. Always. So I began to think, hey, maybe what I did was pretty good. Because all the characters were added and all the characters would disappear, and then we were back to the basic story again.
Why do you think the prequel reminded you of that?
Because the prequel was everything, contained the whole story. I used to take a very novelistic approach to writing, and when I did Dallas, I sat down and wrote about Jock and Digger, how they're both wildcatters in the 30s, and what it was and that Jock had once tried to kill Digger. Digger had once tried to kill Jock, and I started this prequel with a party in 1952, the specific party at which Digger tries to kill Jock. It's a Memorial Day party that the Ewings hold every year for a barbecue that they hold every year for veterans, war veterans, and then Jock and Ellie say, why, Jock says, I know why he wanted to kill me. I might not even blame him, but why today? And the why today would take you into the 3 flashbacks during the 30s. And so it was giving specifics. I hadn't written the specifics then, but I sure did know those guys. And also, Larry Ellican directed it, late Larry Ellican, who was just, in my opinion, the best television director ever. And we did it in Dallas, and I had my whole family there because it was Christmas time. And just the experience and just being there and creating that all, really, it felt really firm. It really, you know what it was? It was like, I guess, if you're a parent that's given up your child, for adoption, although wouldn't be total adoption, and then suddenly you come back and you discover how much you still have, how much genetic connection there still is. So that now Dallas feels very, and then Leonard died some years ago, and the go-to person for it has changed from, it used to be, they never did Leonard instead of me, but it would always be the two of us, and we'd always say the opposite things. And so that's made, strengthened the connection again. But it's not the connection with the experience of the production, it's just the connection with the thing, the thing that's Dallas.
Speaking of the thing that's Dallas, how involved were you, or immersed were you in the whole Who Shot JR frenzy?
I was immersed in it. I was immersed in that frenzy because the press put me in it, and that's one of the things that caused a little bit of strain with me and Leonard, because I didn't have anything to do with it. What happened is that Dallas was so successful, it had 26 shows, had been ordered, and it was really rising every week. So CBS ordered 4 more, and then it was supposed to end with Jock on trial. It was supposed to be the cliffhanger, and they met. I was not in the meeting when they met to do the additional 4 episodes, and how are we going to end the series now? And from what I can straighten out, Capis, Leonard, and Art Lewis are all credited for it, but I think it was Camille Marchetta, who was the story editor, who said, well, why don't we just shoot the son of a bitch? And that's what the ending was. Now, once that went on and became, nobody expected what happened. I mean, that was freaky. So all the press, all the foreign press, would still, I mean, especially the foreign press, where the writer is, I mean, in England, my name was better known than here. Tom Stoppard, was it Tom Stoppard? Oh, yeah, told me I was a more important writer than he was. Cut it out. Well, this was during the early 80s, when this thing was a worldwide phenomenon. He said, well, I never had. I said, yeah, but I've never written plays like you've written. I mean, it did lend it, that success lent itself to excess, so I was involved. But first of all, they did tell me, I mean, right away who killed. But then I thought they were going to change it on me. So a friend of mine called me from England. Bob Schlitt, the guy that hired me for the Blue Knight, said, well, they're taking bets over here. So who did it? I said, you know what, Bob? I can tell you, but they might have changed it. They might have changed it on me even.
When did they tell you it was Kristen?
Right away.
Right away. So they knew right away.
Oh yeah. That's a myth that they did it. They did set it up so that it could be anybody. So people, retroactively thought, well, they're gone under contract. And it's true that Hagman was renegotiating. Diana and I went to New York, and we saw it was the opening. We didn't go opening night. It was a couple nights later of the musical 42nd Street, and that was in that summer or in that fall. And we were in the lobby of the theater. It was very crowded. Terrible show. But anyway, we were in the lobby. It was very crowded with all the motion going. How the New York theaters, the lobby, moving through. And suddenly the motion of all the people reversed. It went this way, and I was actually knocked down. And there I was with one knee on the ground, and I look up. It's Larry Hagman has come in, and that's why everybody turned around like that. And then Larry says, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Just keeping you honest." and it was very funny. And my wife said this woman said to my wife, as somebody was, as I got up, "That's Larry Hagman, that's JR." And she said, "Well, this is my husband, David Jacobs." She never does that. My husband, David Jacobs, he created Dallas. And she said, and then just turned around and went on, "What? What?"
So what did you think of, on top of that media frenzy, the Bobby Ewing storyline, the coming back?
Okay. So I saw Leonard on the steps. It sounded like we had all our communication on the steps. I had heard that Patrick wanted to come back, that they'd wanted to come back. This is going to be my most brutal honesty in this interview. I thought it was a terrible idea. I thought that it would negate the emotion of Bobby's death, that people They have a very willing suspension of disbelief, but I don't think they want to be jerked off too much. I don't think they want to remember that all the tears that they shed have been false. But the myth that was created, which has lasted, and which is absolutely a myth, is, let me back up. Leonard didn't want to come back. Patrick didn't want to come back. They hired Peter Dunn, who had worked for me, and who wasn't getting along with my partner, as the new line producer. Peter wanted to change Dallas the way anybody would change it when you come to a new show. Change the sets. For one thing, Dynasty was out, and Dynasty was so much more opulent, and he wanted to make the sets a little chicer, and he wanted to make the stories a little more human. Nobody liked that. Nobody liked Peter. The numbers started to drop. They blamed Peter and the absence of Patrick for that. But they didn't drop that badly, the numbers. They got Patrick and to come back, and Leonard said his exact words. He said, "I said, how are you going to bring him back?" He said, "Well, he's not much good to us as anybody else but Bobby Ewing." I said, "Well, maybe." And then he said, so then he came up with the shower thing, and I just smiling, just like I'm smiling now. And he said, I know. But he wasn't asking me he wasn't asking me to explain what I've just explained to you. So I thought it was awful. But the mythology is that it then restored the show. It didn't. The numbers stayed exactly the same the following year with Leonard back as executive producer, and I think Phil was gone by this time. And maybe that was a year later. And with Leonard replacing, coming back as Peter. I mean, the show was already past its peak, and it gave it a little spike in the actual episode where he comes out of the shower, but it's not true that it saved the show. Now, maybe it retarded its decline. That's possible.
Since you created this entire place and all of these people, how much did it bother you when things sort of went in a different direction?
I have to say I was removed from it. I mean, I really didn't. I thought it was way past its prime, but I thought Knots Landing was way past it, and we were still doing that.
So, would you say that you had a favorite episode at any point since
Of
you were still
Dallas?
removed? Yeah. Of Dallas.
My favorite episode of Dallas was number 5. It was barbecue.
It's still number
The
5.
first barbecue. It was absolutely. I liked moments on Dallas, and I didn't watch Dallas all the time. I watched. I liked the moment where Jr. learns that that his son is really his son, and that private moment with him in the bedroom. I think that was a very touching, a very sweet moment. I liked. I liked that one too. In the first season, the one during the hurricane. And they'd never had a hurricane, and the papers crucified us because there'd never been a hurricane in Dallas. However, the next year they had a hurricane come through Dallas. So who knew? Who was right? Who was prescient? Who's prescient now?
What would you say the legacy of Dallas is, if there is one?
I think that Dallas. That's a very interesting question. The legacy. I think that Dallas represents the beginning of an era which is ending this year, 2008, in which all of our values as a people have been terribly screwed up. I think that Dallas was trying to, at least in my head and heart, was trying to show that, was never trying to glorify that world. I think I don't know. It has to be seen to have a legacy. And I don't know how much more it's going to be seen. And there's supposed to be a movie, a Dallas movie. I have my real doubts about that. You can come back and I'll append this interview if it really happens, but I don't think it's going to happen.
You don't think the movie's going to
I don't
happen?
think the movie's going to happen.
Ah.
And I think it's too late. I think 3 years ago would have been great, because then you could have said, okay, now JR is president, or not the president, but that world, those guys, where they had the nice big house and the 4 bedrooms upstairs where all the offspring lived. But that it had gone from that world, those people have become, are the guys in charge now. And I think they were in charge for the last 6 years, but I think they screwed up. So I don't know whether it can have a legacy if the final product of their existence is a screw up.
If the movie does happen, what do you think of the casting of J.R. Ewing?
Well, it keeps changing.
What would your preference be?
If my preference of anybody on Earth, George Clooney, but he wouldn't do it because it would be fun too. But I thought Travolta would have been okay, but he's out now too.
Now, we talked a little bit about the prequel, the Dallas, the early years. What did you think about the actors in terms of that, casting-wise and stylistically speaking?
I thought everything about it was brilliant because I was in charge. I think Molly Hagan as Miss Ellie was just perfect, and I thought Dale Metcalf as young Jock was stiff, but so was Jim Davis. So it was a good kind of stiffness. And the guy, I can't remember his name, who played Digger, he's a playwright now. He's a very nice guy. Was terrific. I liked seeing Hoyt Axton. I thought everybody was good. I thought the casting was really good. We didn't actually sit there thinking so hard about making sure that everybody looked and sounded like Molly Hagan didn't look anything like Barbara Bucchetti. But you know what? People who saw it said, it's amazing how much she looks like. You just bring it to it. Because they're living in the character.
Now, from a timeline standpoint, at what point did family end in relation to everything that was going on with Dallas?
Well, I only was with family for a season and a half. I joined them in the 1st of 1977, the 1st of January 1977, and it kept going, though, after I was gone. I mean, I was just the story editor there. I had very little effect on the shape of the show.
What are the responsibilities of a story editor?
The story editor, it's a very good question. When I was first offered the job of story editor, I said, sure, I'll be story editor. What's a story editor? The story editor is the person, or was at the time, the person that makes sure that everything stays in the same style. But the story editors have become producers, so it's changed. At that time, when Sterling Silliphant was story editor of the Naked City, all the scripts would come through his typewriter, so that the voices were always the same, and that there was a consistency. You can't love broccoli in this episode and hate it in the other. And he'd also polish it up. And that's what I did. Carol McKeon was really the rewriter of finality on that. She was the producer. But I was allowed, they gave me a lot of, after I made it through the first 2 weeks, Carol and Nigel were just great to me. I learned more from them, I have to say, than about dramatic writing. Maybe not about, I think of Nigel's, when a scene doesn't work, put an obstacle in it. When you need the scene, just for exposition, don't make the exposition. Get rid of the exposition if you can. Just all about character. Nobody ever suddenly realizes in drama, which is a great thing to know. Because whenever I see it, I hate overhearing scenes, he'd say. And then I've always hated overhearing scenes. Or somebody and he's right. They're always cheap when somebody overhears something that's key to the plot. And Nigel, Carol was a natural writer like me. She just typewriters in front and she just goes. Whereas Nigel, who used to be an actor, is a self-taught writer. He used to write little radio plays. So it's like baseball. The natural player is never going to be a good manager. It's a catcher. A second string catcher makes a great manager. And because he has to think about what he does and how he does it. And Nigel was just the most terrific teacher. And that show was very good. It was very good. I think it's dated when you see it now, more than, well, Dallas is beginning to look dated too. But it was, it had a fabulous cast. I mean, just the best cast. Seda Thompson and Jim Broderick and Christy McNichol and Gary Frank and Baxter Burney, Meredith. I mean, that was a good. You could write anything for them. But it wasn't mine, and I knew it wasn't mine. I felt it wasn't mine right from the start. But when I had that development deal at Larimar, I was learning so much at Family that's the way I wanted to go. That Scenes from a Marriage way. But then I found. I don't know how. It was really on Knots Landing when I found my own voice. Well, no, the show about the kids that got married, but it was only 4 of them. And that was a little too soft. Knots Landing was more melodramatic.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Knots Landing. In 1979, it starts. How did we talked a little bit about how we got there, but that year.
Okay, Knots Landing was the first thing that I took to CBS. The Scenes from a Marriage ×5, with it peppered with no down payment, and they didn't want to do it. They said, we want to do something like it, but let's do a glitzier saga. Now after that, I didn't want to do any more of these serials, but I had a show in mind called The Last Island. Not like. It's not fair to say it's like Lost, but it was a place like East Hampton or Martha's Vineyard or something in the summer where all the men go back to the city one Monday morning, and then by midday they realize, or it takes a day for them to realize there's nothing outside. You can't, everything that left, all the boats that left, none of them come back. If you try to call the city, it rings, but nothing happens. And within a day or two, they realize that something outside has happened, and they could be the only place on Earth. But it was big, right? It had a good-sized population, the way Martha's Vineyard or Nantucket would. And it was a social drama. It wasn't really, it didn't have any supernatural like Lost did. But it was a combination of doomsday, or post-apocalyptic, and utopian. Because it had the opportunity for everybody to restart their life. It was terrific. That's a show I think every writer in Hollywood has their favorite show that was never done, or their favorite screenplay. But it was a great idea because, there would be the hoarders on the island, and there would be the people that, what do you do? Do you open the schools on Labor Day? And how about the people that are renting? Do they have to give their houses back? Because the contracts matter. There's many more times women than men making up for my deprived high school. And my woman-deprived high school. And what do you do with this stuff in the freezers? You still have electricity, but it's going to stop. What do you do with the stuff in the freezers at the market? What do? You have to cook it all. So, and can it. So just that is a great thing to have happen. Anyway, I really was excited about it. So I went in and I gave a pitch as animated as I am right now. I see my enthusiasm hasn't gone away. And Bob Silberling was in charge of CBS then. And so I finished, and I said, then at the end of the first season, they hear a beep. When somebody picks up the phone and there's something out there. They're sitting there, it's quiet. And then Bob opens up the drawer and he says, I pulled out this Knots Landing. He said, is there any way we can make this a Dallas spin-off? Because Dallas was really taking off. So do you don't want to do the last one? He said, well, maybe, but let's talk about a way to make. I said, well, it's easy because one of the 4 families could be changed. It could be made into Gary and Val, who are already established on Dallas, but not recurring characters. I mean, recurring, but not part of the permanent ensemble. So we made one of the guy that owned the No, it was a guy. I forgot. But anyway, we just took one family out and replaced them with Gary and Val. That was easy. And then to make it a spin-off, we have Miss Ellie buys in the house on Dallas, and then they move in next week.
How closely did the two shows then relate to each other in terms of storylines?
They didn't relate well because they were different scales. Now, we did use Larry Hagman a number of times, and we used Mary Crosby as Kristen, who comes after she's revealed as the murderer she is. And we had Lucy come because her parents lived there. But all of those shows, as I remember them, maybe if I re-looked at them now, I would think, excuse me, I would think differently. I think were the weakest shows, among the weakest shows we did, because the scale was just all off. JR is a bigger-than-life character. We didn't have any bigger-than-life characters on Knots Landing.
No JR equivalents?
No. And one of the clever things we did is when we did the first 12, because that was a mid-season replacement, we did those. We purposely didn't have a JR because everybody would be looking for a JR. So I said to Mike, let's not put anybody. They'll say, oh, she's going to be, or he's going to be, he's going to be. And it's none of them. And then you have Abby comes up, the first episode of the second season, and that's your JR. But started off, she drives up in a Volvo with kids in the back, and she's just recently divorced, and so she has to use herself or her sex as currency, the way JR uses money as currency.
Now, did you guys ever touch on the death of Jock?
We did, yeah, because Gary had to leave and go to the funeral,
Right.
and we would have been really screwed up. I mean, the kid's named Bobby. Their kid is named Bobby, but so what? I mean, they're Christians. I mean, they name people after living people, so that's all.
How about the remarriage of Miss Ellie?
We never dealt with that.
The death of Bobby?
We did, but not. We almost did in the Dallas early years, which would have ruined that movie.
So you weren't forced to deal with the resurrection of Bobby?
No.
Excellent. How was casting this series different than casting?
This series was different because we, the first couple of parts we just offered. There was no auditions necessary. We had Don Murray and Michelle Lee. Joan Van Ark and Ted Shackelford were already, no, Joan Van Ark was already established. David Aykroyd had been Gary on Dallas. But, and it turned out to be the last part we cast. We couldn't find the correct Gary. But Ted Shackelford turned out to be pretty good. I liked him a lot.
So were there any characters that you had a specific actor in mind?
On Knots Landing, no. Except Joan Van Ark, we knew was going to be.
So who was the hardest character to cast?
The hardest character cast on Knots Landing was Gary, because we had already been cast as Gary Ewing on with David Aykroyd, who was wonderful, and we never could get a handle on it. But we didn't really have any pattern. I mean, we saw short guys, tall guys, fat guys. You know, he could have been anything. But Ted was who had done a soap. I don't remember which soap. Was very good. But Ted actually became one of my favorites as far as just actors who are pleasures to work with.
Ted Shackelford.
Ted Shackelford, absolutely, because he's so well prepared and he's so he's an excellent actor. But he doesn't knock you out in the room, you know, when he comes in. But he was a good choice. He was a lucky choice.
Could you talk a little bit more about some of the cast members, Joan Van Ark and?
Joan Van Ark is a lunatic and still is, and I still adore her. She's the most. She's one of the most insecure people I've ever met, but she's a terrific actress, and she really does. You really could depend on her. You absolutely could depend on her to deliver. And the funny thing about Joan is that she was so. I have to tell the story that because I was always very open to the actors, that Joan would have problems with the next script, and she'd say, "Well," I said, "Well, what is it, Joan?" On the phone, she said, I really would rather sit with you." And she said, "Okay." So she'd come over on Sunday. She'd bring toys for the children. She'd bring flowers for my wife, for ruining their day. She'd give me the three things. 15 minutes later, she'd be gone, and the problem would be solved. Michelle would come over, and she'd say, "Oh, I love this script. Just a couple of things, all right?" And then she would leave, and I'd put a piece of paper in the typewriter and say, "Fade in," and I have to start.
And this is Michelle Lee.
Michelle Lee. Michelle was the strongest actor, and the one who who was probably the most demanding in terms of the script. However, she never had to change a word. She and I have the same voice, and it wasn't like it's just coincidental. We have the same syntax, we have the same vocabulary, and whenever I wanted to give the character an opinion, it was my opinion and it was her opinion. I didn't have to alter. If we write for Bill Devane, you have to hear his voice a little bit. Although I found out you don't really have to write it. He'll do it. He'll same thing with Kevin Dobson. Kevin makes it his own. I had a reputation at the end of Knots of being good with so-called difficult actors, and everyone that had that reputation I found was terrific. It's like Randy Moss, plays for the football player, has the worst reputation, and he comes and everybody, he's an angel. Because I'd worked so well with Bill Devane, I was asked to take over this series with Peter Strauss, and Peter Strauss was just wonderful. I mean, intense and definite opinions, but he and I just had great. He was smart, and he had and so I don't think those actors that get it's different than somebody who's bitchy, but that's a whole different. I haven't had many of them.
If I could touch on one or two of the characters that these people played, Michelle Lee's character, Karen Fairgate. How was Karen as a character in relation to Michelle's actual personality?
Mem shows, same thing.
And Bill Devane's?
Devane's was the same. Devane plays himself, except that Devane's. No, actually, I'll take that. I was going to say the character of Greg Sumner was more venal than Bill Devane is. That's true, but he had his moments. I mean, the way he loved Laura on that show was terrific, and he really let himself be in love with her, and he was really crushed when she left and wouldn't let herself die with him. God, there were some great episodes. We had the best writing. My only resentment about being the business, everybody's full of it. I'm not. I'm really happy. Was that Knots Landing was always on against industry shows, which were great shows. We were first against Hill Street Blues for years, and then we were against L.A. Law, and we would win the ratings most of the time with against Hill Street Blues, and kind of split it with L.A. Law. But we would never get any credit. And these actors and these writers on that show did some of the greatest stuff on television. There was a great speech that Michelle made, the Pollyanna speech, that we have more requests for copies of. And Devane's performances when Laura went off to die, I mean, were just unbelievable television. They weren't even television. They were transcendent. I mean, they weren't even filmed. They were just Marion Cotillard. I mean, they were just fabulous.
Would you say those were some of your favorite episodes or storylines?
Yes. My favorite storyline on Knots. I liked a lot of them, but Michael and I had different. Michael Feilerman and I had very different approaches. I would say when we broke Val and Gary up. How many times can we break them up? This was in the second season. He said, every season. We can do it as much as we... And we could. He was right. I hated the twins story. When Val's twins are stolen. I just hated it. And it worked. My favorite story on Knots Landing was the Chip and CG story, though, if you remember that. It's where Lisa Hartman and I forgot the actor's name, Michael Sarantino. Mostly because we would sit down, the writers, Michael and I and the writers would sit down with a big table and in fact, the table's upstairs. And we'd put all the characters' names at the beginning of the season and how they would connect, how they felt about each other, and how they connect. Because the one thing I learned from both of these shows, that if the structure is if the conflict is in the structure, you make your job much easier. If the conflict is not in the structure, then you have to create conflict. And it's very artificial. A lot of cop shows do that. People are yelling at each other. To Jack Klugman, he's yelling at somebody, just giving him exposition. Why is he yelling? Because the structure's not there. If you know, on Dallas, one of the reasons Dallas was a quiet show, it worked is because Pamela wanted Bobby to do something that made that was an obstacle to what JR wanted. So you didn't have to do scenes and stories. You knew that conflict existed. And on Knots Landing too, it was harder because they weren't related. It wasn't one family. But we would always make sure. When we added, it was actually Ann Marcus, the creator of Mary Hartman, who came to work for us as a story editing producer one year, and she came up with the story of Chip and CG, and CG was because Richard had a restaurant, and Gary wanted to be a music producer, and he found this girl, CG, and he set up a studio, and Gary was involved with Abby then, who then made CG. He had lent money to Richard to open a restaurant, so she put CG in the restaurant to help give her some exposure, and then Chip was this guy who was a messenger who brought Val's book to her house when Val wrote a book with the editor's notes, and then he met CG. So Val now, everybody becomes connected by these two characters, and when you have that, boy, the next season's a breeze. You know what the ultimate of this is? Big Love. Big Love, I envy Big Love so much because all they have to do is write a scene, and then they write it 3 times. And then pretty soon they're through a script. Because all of the conflict is built right into there, and of course the 3 wives.
As a writer, and creator of the show, what was a typical day for you like on this show?
Or not? Well, I usually had more than one show. We only remember the hits. But a typical day for Knots was I would go in the morning, and the producer, say Larry Kosh or whoever was the line producer, would have things that I needed to know, and they'd ask the production reports from the previous day and whatever the thoughts were, and I'd go over those. And then we would have, usually, this is typical, I'm not saying every day, we'd have a production meeting for the next show. And before the production meeting, I would have a meeting, I forgot what I called them, pre-production meeting. But it was just about when the script had just gone out to everybody, the next script. And I would tell everybody, not everybody had to come, but anybody that had a problem had to come. Could we shoot this show in 7 days, and could we shoot it on budget? Now, if transportation saw that they could never do it in their budget, the transportation guy was at the meeting. Nobody ever came because they didn't have enough money, because they had too much money. But we would then go through the script, talk about the problems that we have. That was those were fun. And then we go over the board, to see what the shooting schedule was. And generally, we'd have to see if if we combine these 2 locations, if we repeat this location, we can save 4 hours here on this day with moving equipment. That was the morning.